You've probably seen labels on government documents, right? Some are stamped top secret, and others are totally public. But what about that huge gray area in the middle? Well, that's where you find something called CUI, or Controlled Unclassified Information. Today, we're going to break down what this really important label means by looking at how the Department of Defense shares sensitive info with the U.S. Congress. So first, we got to understand the problem CUI was created to solve. Just picture all government information on a spectrum. On one end, you have the super secret classified stuff. On the other, you've got public press releases. But what about all that stuff in between? That's the gray area we're talking about.
And this is really the central question, isn't it? Think about it. Maybe a document on military logistics, or a legal memo, or even some personal data. On its own, it might not be a huge state secret, but if it got into the wrong hands, it could cause some serious damage. So how do you protect it without classifying literally everything?
Right. And this is the heart of the risk. One single piece of unclassified data might look pretty harmless, but adversaries are really, really good at connecting the dots. When they start putting a bunch of these harmless pieces together, they can suddenly uncover sensitive mission details, troop movements, you name it. The government knew it needed a clear handle with care sign for this kind of information.
And that's where the CUI program comes in. This was the government's big solution. It was designed to create one single government-wide standard for handling exactly this type of sensitive but unclassified information. So what is CUI officially? The definition is unclassified information requiring safeguarding or dissemination controls. Now, the key words there are dissemination controls. This isn't about locking info in a vault forever. It's about being really careful about who gets to see it and making absolutely sure it doesn't just end up on the public internet. So this CUI marking does three main things. First, it standardizes the rules for all sorts of info, from privacy data to technical specs. Before CUI, you had all these different agencies with their own confusing labels. It was a mess. Second, it's just a big, clear alert for anyone who gets the document. And third, it helps create consistent security processes across the entire government.
Okay, so if the information is controlled, the obvious next question is, who gets to see it? How do they decide who has a need to know?
Well, the official standard is something called a lawful government purpose. I know, that sounds a little vague, a little bit like legal jargon. But when you actually break it down, it's a pretty broad and practical definition. In the real world, lawful government purpose covers a whole lot of different people. Of course, you've got members of Congress and their staff, but it also includes state and local governments, industrial partners working on defense contracts, and even allied nations or academic researchers in some cases. The whole point is to get the info to people who need it to do their jobs while keeping it out of the public domain. All right, so let's zoom in on that specific relationship between the Department of Defense and Congress, because it's just a perfect case study of how CUI is meant to work. Now, listen up, because this is a really critical point that clears up a lot of confusion. The CUI label does not stop information from being shared within Congress. A member can absolutely share a CUI document with their staff or with other members. They can keep their briefing materials. The only thing it prohibits is public release. It's a tool made to help the government work, not to slow it down. And it gets even more specific. You might see a marking that says LMI. That just means the document is about Congress's legislative or oversight work with the DoD. And then there's for committee use only, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The info is meant for the specific committee that asked for it. But even that committee use only label isn't some permanent brick wall. If that committee decides it needs to share the information more widely to get its job done, the process is simple. They just get back in touch with the DoD to get that limitation lifted. See? It's all about collaboration. Okay, so you have this whole system. How does the Department of Defense actually make sure everyone understands the rules and, follows them? Well, it all comes down to a massive effort in training and reform. 2.3 million. Let that sink in for a second. That's how many military, civilian, and contractor personnel have been trained on the CUI program. This isn't just some memo that got sent out one afternoon. This is a huge, ongoing educational effort to make sure the system actually works the way it's supposed to. And it's not a one-and-done kind of thing either. This training is required every single year for everyone. That level of repetition really shows you just how seriously the DoD takes the proper handling of this information.
And all this training is really part of a much bigger picture. The DoD isn't just looking at its own people, it's actively working to improve its reporting to Congress and is pushing for every single federal agency to get on board with the same CUI system. The ultimate goal here? A clear, simple, and effective standard for sensitive information across the entire U.S. government.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought. This whole CUI program is a really fascinating, real-world attempt to answer one of the most fundamental questions of governing. It's a system built on the idea that, hey, not everything can be public, but not everything needs to be top secret either. And finding that balance, well, that's one of the constant challenges for any open society.